Before we begin with this video, I'd like to direct you guys' attention to what I consider to be one of the best indie horror games, Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. The game, while being the sixth installation in the FNAF franchise, subverts the gameplay formula that nearly all of its predecessors followed, which was surviving anywhere from 5 nights to a week at each of the given locations. While it did revert back to the classic, spooky formula of said previous games, it provided a unique challenge for speedrunners and experienced players by removing the frame of time you must survive in each night, leaving it to the player to decide when they wanted the night to end. It also included a fun tycoon section where you could build your own pizzeria that was a nice deviation from the main, tense gameplay described before. The lore of this game specifically was also very well written, and was a serviceable and sound conclusion to the Five Nights at Freddy's series. Nearly every loose end was tied up. Every main character was burned to a crisp. It was all wrapped up in a neat little bow, and is definitely one of the best indie horror games in my eyes. And a couple months earlier, Doki Doki Literature Club came out. Now, I absolutely abhor this game with every quirk present in my body, and it is exceptionally poorly made in nearly every department as well. But if you somehow enjoy this game, that's totally okay. I'm not going to try and coerce you into not enjoying something that you love, because that's just being an asshole. However, there is a fine line between liking a piece of media and stating that said piece of media is good. The former is subjective, or based solely on the opinions of a certain person, while the latter is objective, or built on the foundations of valid criticisms present in whatever is being talked about. There are certain cases in which I find myself liking an objectively bad piece of media, such as Sonic the Hedgehog Genesis for the Game Boy Advance. This game has an atrocious case of screen crunch, plays like dog shit, and is widely considered to be one of the worst ports/remakes of all time. I recognize these flaws, but still enjoy the game regardless due to me playing it on this channel a couple of years back, and having a great time with it, even if that enjoyment was purely ironic. The same thing goes for the opposite. There are games like Rocket League, for example, that personally do not appeal to me, but I am capable of realizing that they are very well made games that people reasonably praise. There are also games that I like that are good, along with games that I hate that are bad. So why does this matter? Well, it matters because I want you all to be mature in the comments section of this video. I understand that this is YouTube, but if you leave a comment on this video, whether it be positive or negative, or whether it may contain constructive or destructive criticism, I will likely see it, and in some cases, respond to it. I've observed the ddlc fandom for some time, and I've come to realize how belligerent they can be sometimes, so take this as your warning, because if you're a ddlc fan, you will not like any of what I'm going to say about the game in this video. Now, with all that out of the way, it's time to discuss why Doki Doki Literature Club is an overrated bore fest of a video game. Seabass, what? You can't criticize a game like this for gameplay, that's not what the genre's about. Yes, I understand that ddlc is a visual novel, and that therefore, there is going to be little to no gameplay. ddlc plays the same as any other visual novel, relying on the player pressing enter to progress the story further. Standard stuff, and I am obviously unable to critique a game simply because it is a part of a certain genre. This is where I wanted to bring up the other main complaint I got with the original version of the script for this video. People were pointing out that I was going to use gameplay from another YouTuber instead of recording my own, and that I hadn't actually played the game, therefore meaning that I was unable to criticize it correctly, despite the fact that I had played it 4 years ago. Since it's a universal doctrine that you must experience whatever you're analyzing in order to properly speak about how bad it is. And in a vacuum, yes, these people are right. However, ddlc is exempt from this rule, and I'll explain why. For a lot of bad games, it's important that you actually play the game itself, obviously, for not just the reasons stated beforehand, but also because these games have controls that you need to feel and actual gameplay you need to experience. Games like the aforementioned Sonic Genesis for the GBA, for example, are games that you need to play because you can't imagine how awful the physics are and how bad the control is before you give a meaningful analysis of it. Simply watching Angry Video Game Nerd isn't enough because that's called appeal to authority, and you don't know whether James is wrong or right if you haven't played it yourself. ddlc, on the other hand, is a visual novel, and as I stated before, there's minimal gameplay that comes along with it. I know there's people out there who will point out the end of the game in which you have to delete a character file, but that takes literally half a minute to do in a 6-hour-long game. So if you're planning on playing ddlc and quote-unquote immersifying yourself in the experience, don't. There's no difference between watching a long play of the game on YouTube and playing the actual game yourself. And no, I'm not talking about watching Markiplier play it or anything like that. I'm talking about a no commentary, full playthrough of the game that allows you to read the dialogue for yourself. The only reason why I ultimately decided on replaying the game was because these people helped me realize that if I didn't, there would be people doing nothing but bickering and bickering in this video's comment section about how I have no room to speak about this game, even if I were to include this segment. So to the people who kept calling me a moron and doubling down on the doctrine I stated before without even responding to my argument, there you go. I actually played through it again and used my own footage. Back to the actual gameplay itself, even though I'm unable to criticize it due to it being a different genre of gaming, what I am able to criticize is the lack of creativity and overall laziness present in the gameplay. What I mean by this is that similar to a lot of Telltale games, the game presents you with choices occasionally, such as the ability to spend more time with one of the girls of your choice. The issue with this is that none of these choices ever have any bearing on the plot and all lead to the exact same outcome. For example, the build-up to the infamous suicide scene. If you choose to express your love for Sayori, she hangs herself, and the game basically pulls a Ben Drowned and tells you that you shouldn't have done that after you arrive at the scene. And on the other hand, if you choose to friendzone her, she goes insane and will still kill herself. Not only is this an example of contrived storytelling, which is something we'll get to in a bit, but it also renders the choices you were given essentially pointless. Furthermore, there are also various other choices you must make in the game, such as choosing who to prepare for the festival with, along with who you want to walk home with at the end of Act 1. But once again, none of these choices have any bearing on the plot whatsoever, and are just there to be there. Same thing goes for the poetry segments after every day. It's just there to burn time. This is a recurring issue we will be seeing time and time again throughout the game. The game takes concepts that on a superficial level could work and throws them out the window without expanding them in the slightest, and at the end of the day, you're left with nothing more than lingering snippets of something that could have worked that wasn't fleshed out enough. Alright, the gameplay was pretty bad, but that's kind of a given because this is supposed to be a visual novel. But what is inexcusable in a genre like this is, of course, the writing. It's universally agreed upon that the writing of any piece of media is incredibly important and can bring the content in question up or down a lot in terms of how great it is. And that is especially true in, well, books or novels, which is what Doki Doki is trying to be. So that means that it is most likely very well written and has interesting characters. Right? No. Absolutely fucking not. Let's start off with these three bitches, and I'm grouping them together because there's nothing except the type of anime archetype they are that's different about them. Natsuki is your typical tsundere, I don't know how to say it, who is a character that is mean on the outside but that is tender on the inside. And Yuri is your typical... Hold on, let me Google it. So, according to Wikipedia, Yuri is something called a dandere and a kudere, which is whatever, I don't know, man, I go outside. This means that she is mostly silent and doesn't share anything about herself. And as for Sayori, according to Wikipedia, she's something called a Genki girl. Seriously, guys, this video has subjected me to pain and torture when it comes to this anime girl shit, and I want it to end so fucking badly. Which means that she is an outgoing and bubbly individual. All things considered, there's nothing offensively bad about these characters, right? Well, that's the thing. There's literally nothing special about them. I could literally search up each of these archetypes for myself and find at least 3 other anime characters who have basically the same personality. All of them are trite, generic bullshit, and I don't understand why people goon to them like no tomorrow, while also praising them for being masterfully well written, when they are literally the anime equivalent of NPCs. The only one that is somewhat fleshed out is Sayori, and even then, all of her exposition is cliche and full of generic tropes I'm sure we've all seen before. We've all seen the somewhat insecure and happy-go-lucky character bonding with the protagonist before, and the game doesn't do anything special with it. This also makes all of the girls' deaths inconsequential in the long run, since none of the characters do anything to distinguish themselves to the player. The choices in the game that I stated in the last section, such as whether you choose to walk home with Yuri or Sayori, could have and should have uncovered more about the characters themselves, instead of just leading to the exact same outcome. It was such a missed opportunity, and it makes me bang my head against the wall when it comes to how ungodly awful the characters are written here. And yes, I am aware of the day before the festival where you have to choose whether you want to hang out with Yuri or Natsuki in Act 1, and it's trite, generic, cliche, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't do anything new or interesting to flesh out the characters, and we end up having the same thoughts on them as before because the game is too lazy to give its characters even the slightest bit of exposition. As I said before, it has zero bearing on the plot and is just filler. Yuri and Natsuki are also simplified down to a bunch of edgy screamers in Act 2, making all the exposition I explained above completely pointless. I can't believe that Salvato was able to make two characters that were already lukewarm and tepid before, and turn them on their heads in the worst ways possible, but here we are now. Okay, so that's 75% of the cast. So that leaves us with one character, and she is so awful that it physically hurts to even look at her after making this video. Let us discuss what I consider to be my least favorite fictional character of all time, Monika. First and foremost, the character's motivation is very bewildering. The game never suggests that her coding abilities are limited to certain intervals of time, so the fact that she knows how to manipulate the game, and decides to just let you talk to these blank sheets of paper instead of just flat out deleting them to begin with, is completely illogical. It makes all of her actions so irrational and flat out nonsensical. Like, why the fuck would you want to disturb the MC by subjecting two people to killing themselves? It just makes her all the more unlikable, and I don't get how people somehow like this character. Additionally, her character is even less interesting before the plot twist of this game, with it once again resorting back to being another basic anime archetype similar to the other characters and not being engaging in the slightest. And before any little shits type up something along the lines of, "Oh, you just don't understand her, she's really so sweet and kind and innocent," shut the fuck up and listen to what I have to say. Monika is not a complex character. Her motivation might be intricate because of how poorly written it is and how many layers of awfulness it contains, but Monika herself as a character is not complex. She is a perfect Mary Sue who exists solely to be the game's antagonist and nothing else. With the other characters, even if they had nearly nothing of substance to them, they were at least based off of some type of anime archetype that gave them the slightest bit of an edge against Monika. There was at least one, maybe two adjectives you could use to describe them. But with Monika, there's literally none. Adding on to that, no, you cannot use the word obsessive to describe her. If you take away her motivation, you take away her obsessiveness. It doesn't count. And the fact that people somehow idolize this awful character is simply revolting. How do you simp for someone who literally forces her friends to die in unnecessary and gruesome ways and who flat out deletes them afterwards? But she's remorseful at the very end. No, she is not. She backpedals on what she did to her friends because she got what she deserved. That's not being remorseful, that's just trying to make a last-minute effort to resonate with the player. A lot of people also like to point out that she is stuck in this visual novel-esque world and that everyone should be sympathetic with her, with them asking a question to many of her detractors in defense of her that goes along the lines of, "What would you do in her position?" Well, to the people who say that, here's my response. If I had the ability to manipulate a game I was stuck in via coding where I can't have any genuine human interaction, and when I realize that an actual human being is infiltrating said game, I'd not traumatize the actual fuck out of them. I'd approach them amicably and not straight up delete my friends that I care about, which would cause the other person to loathe me. The argument of, quote unquote, put yourself in her shoes doesn't work because not many people are clinically insane Mary Sues. Also, considering the fact that this dialogue exists, I'm not sure I would want to sympathize with a dickhead like her. Praising this heinous character is the equivalent of going up to a character like Jeff the Killer and saying, "Oh my god, he's so quirky, he's literally me!" So yeah, Monika is the worst of the fucking worst. When you want to make a game that is supposed to be a literal book but turned into a virtual experience, it is absolutely imperative that the characters are well written and that the cast is not filled with one-noted, lukewarm characters. However, I bet that there are some people out there saying that this game is supposed to be a parody and deconstruction of visual novels, and I hear you. Don't worry. The issue with this game being a deconstruction, though, is the fact that it barely does anything with the concept. As we'll uncover later on in the next section, it quite literally forgets the fact that it's supposed to be a parody for over half of its runtime. And because of the fact that it forgets that it's a deconstruction, we are left with some of the most generic, boring, trite characters in all of fiction, with one that is the outlier for all the wrong reasons. I'd forgive most of them if the game didn't force us to spend so much time with them for no reason, but that's simply not the case here. Disappointing as shit for a game like this. Alright, so that's 2 strikes out. The characters were boring and not interesting in the slightest. But hey, good characters aren't everything. Some of my favorite pieces of media do not have the most well-written or interesting characters. However, it's the story that really makes up for it. So that's why in this section, I'd like to dissect the game act by act, to make sure whether the story is truly good or not. Okay, Let's start off by dissecting Act 1, in which the story kicks off by introducing us to the aforementioned Genki girl, Sayori. She begins blabbering nonsense about how we should probably look at different clubs, because soon enough it seems as if we're going to college. Good to know these characters are of age though, because Jesus Christ. Anyway, we jump to the end of the school day, where the MC didn't choose anything, and then Sayori says that he should join the literature club, and... What happened? Okay, yeah, I think you get the idea at this point. There's no reason to go over the main plot of this game because there is quite literally nothing of substance to it. It has so many cliches in it that it would make fucking Sonic.exe blush, and the bland characters do not help at all in that regard and come off as obnoxious little shits that contribute absolutely nothing to the story. But hey, if you really want to know what happens in the rest of the act, we get introduced to the girls and then some wacky slapstick hijinks happens that was less necessary than Toy Story 5. Maybe it could be a tiny bit interesting if the slapstick was somewhat clever or entertaining, but it really isn't. It's just overused anime tropes combined with poorly translated jabs that make this act drag on when it really shouldn't at all, considering the very point of the game is to be a meta take on the visual novel genre. As an addendum to that last sentence, I must also say that this completely useless exposition we're getting lasts over 3 hours. To put that into perspective, the gameplay footage I recorded for this video is over 6 hours long. That means that quite literally half of this game's runtime is dedicated to useless garbage that once again is a notion that goes completely against the point of the game. And you might be asking, how exactly is that the case? Why is that contradictory? Well, it's because as I stated before, this game is supposed to be a deconstruction and a parody of visual novels. The issue with this is that Dan Salvato had absolutely no idea what he was fucking doing because this ain't how you write a parody. In shows like South Park, for example, most of the content you see is supposed to be a parody of in-real-life events or other forms of media. However, South Park gives a little bit of context to the subject material, and then completely shits on it in the funniest and most intellectual way possible. This is where ddlc really struggles. It spends so much time on stupid, unimportant context that doesn't matter in the long run and drags on and on unnecessarily for God knows why. It genuinely feels like a first draft for a lost episode creepypasta written by a 10-year-old giving us useless information that doesn't at all benefit the main story. And to those of you saying, well, what about the secret poems or other Easter eggs the game has a chance of displaying sporadically? There is no fine line between whether this is Monika's doing or whether it's actually a reflection of the rest of the literature club's thoughts and feelings. Monika being portrayed as this omnipotent anomaly fundamentally breaks any attempt that these secrets had at being meaningful because, as stated before, the game never explicitly states if the rest of the literature club or Monika are responsible for producing them. And guess what? That's not even the worst part of this act. There's still one more thing I must talk about that makes this game go from a boring slog to an infuriating abomination of a video game. What I am referring to, of course, is what most people think of when this game is brought up, which is the infamous suicide scene. And my god, did this scene make me fucking livid. To start off, let's talk about the actual motivations behind Sayori killing herself. We see that right before MC walks in on Sayori hanging herself that they had an interaction regarding their relationship with each other. And as stated in the gameplay section of this video, you are given a choice as to whether you want to friendzone Sayori or say that you love her. Unfortunately, no matter what you choose, Sayori kicks the bucket either way. This, ladies and gentlemen, is an example of forced, contrived storytelling. Previously in the story, we saw that Sayori was an energetic, happy individual who was somewhat insecure at times. It makes absolutely no sense why she would go home and hang herself after one conversation that didn't sit well with her. That is extremely unrealistic and downright fucking disrespectful. The fact that Salvato claims that Doki Doki handles topics such as suicide and self-harm with a lot of respect is fucking pathetic. Using suicide, which is something that many people suffer from today, as nothing more than a plot point, with an awful explanation initially as to why the character decided to do so, is repugnant and inexcusable. Because in the words of Hoodoo Hoodlum's Revenge, killing yourself or going insane over something as simple as a confession is not what a normal person would do. And yes, I understand that we have a conversation with her prior to this regarding her venting her feelings. Only issue with this is that it doesn't work for two reasons. One is the obvious elephant in the room, Monika's coding abilities, which are relevant here for all of the same reasons as the Easter eggs I mentioned before. Two is that just like the suicide scene itself, it's still incredibly forced. There's like zero build-up to it, just like before, since once again, Sayori was a very upbeat person with a slight knack for messing things up. There wasn't anything that subtly hinted at her being depressed before until now, making it so obvious that this is all Monika's doing. In addition, the game itself also treats Sayori's death in a very insensitive way by adding glitching effects and horrifying background music. I don't think I need to explain why this is disrespectful. Suicide is something that should always be treated with the utmost amount of respect, and the moment when it happens should be one where it speaks for itself, not one that is spooky because it's a horror game. Adding this extra flair to an important character's death just makes it seem like Sayori was just there to be killed off. And speaking of her just being there to be killed off, that is exactly how it is. Sayori is only present in the game to be killed off by Monika, because of course, the game needs you to fear its antagonist somehow. This in turn makes the scene where Sayori dies even less impactful, even less logical, and even less respectful. Less impactful because now you know that she's just a pawn in a bigger game and therefore all the exposition you got of her was pointless, kinda like this game. Less logical because you begin to ask yourself, why did Monika resort to suicide? Why couldn't it have been her moving away, her becoming isolated, etc.? Why did it have to be suicide? And even less respectful, because apart from the depiction of suicide being unrealistic, it now doesn't even make any sense from a story perspective. Can't believe Salvato had the audacity to say that Doki Doki takes topics like suicide very seriously when this scene exists. Fucking pathetic. Anyway, let's move on to Act 2, where it's kinda more of the same. I say kinda because the pointless and uninteresting main story is still here, but with a few notable differences we'll discuss in a moment. One of the distinctions in this act is that everything is glitching all of a sudden, and while this may seem cool and interesting as this marks where the story switches to a psychological horror game, it flat out just doesn't make any sense. Obviously, we learn later on that Sayori being gone was done by Monika in an attempt to have the player like her more, but the sporadic glitching is flat out nonsensical because the game never explains why that is the case. Did Sayori's CHR file include some important code that made the game malfunction? Did Monika, for whatever reason, tamper with the game a bit too much? Explain, game, explain! And I know that in the beginning it's somewhat explained because the game is seemingly breaking due to Sayori being eradicated from existence. However, that explanation doesn't work because the game restarts itself after realizing that Sayori is gone, meaning that all the glitching should have stopped after that. In addition, no. Do not give me the excuse that the game is still glitching throughout because Monika is learning how to tamper with the game. She already mastered manipulating the game files with Sayori when she escalated her depression levels. The game did not glitch out until the very end of Act 1 when we walked into Sayori's room, after Monika had already made her depressed. The game has already corrected itself at the beginning of Act 2, and if she's already mastered the art of modifying the character's code, something that is shown to us on a silver platter with the Sayori death scene, it doesn't make any sense as to why the game is fighting against her. The glitching itself is also ridiculous. When a game is malfunctioning, I'd expect to see binary appearing or code being shown out of nowhere, not a fucking blood-red screen popping into existence or static appearing during an argument with the characters. It feels like the game is glitching just to be scary rather than it being a realistic approach to video game corruption, which doesn't make any sense considering the fact that it's supposed to be a literal meta take on visual novels. By the same token, the quote-unquote psychological aspect of this act just straight up doesn't work because the game hasn't given enough depth to the characters to make us care for them. They're, as I said before, blank sheets of paper, and the game does absolutely nothing new or original to give them even the most microscopic iota of depth. There is also a massive inconsistency with the way that Monika handles the remaining two girls in the literature club, Yuri and Natsuki. She tries to make them more boring so that we deter our attention to her instead of them, which is fine, I guess. If it weren't for what directly preceded the act, why did Monika choose to make Sayori hang herself, yet Natsuki and Yuri are subjected to a subtle AI change? Why didn't she just kill them all off to begin with if she knew that they might also be massive thorns in her ass just like Sayori? It all feels so forced, so contrived, so much bullshit! Alright, let's keep it together. We gotta move on. Alright. And while we're on the topic of contrived storytelling, we have yet another extremely sensitive topic being brought into the story for nothing more than shock value. Remember when I said in the character section of the video how Yuri and Natsuki are dumbed down to nothing more than screamers in Act 2? Well, for whatever reason, Monika decides to make Natsuki talk about her abusive relationship with her father, which has absolutely zero bearing on the plot and is just there to scare the audience. Nothing would have changed if this just would have been left out, and it doesn't flesh out Natsuki any more than before. Maybe we could have gotten some side story where we act as her guardian or something like that, but nah. Salvato chose to just use domestic violence to shock the audience, which is simply disgusting. Oh, and there's even more contrived storytelling in this act too, because we have yet another suicide scene on our hands, and once again, it makes little to no sense. This suicide scene is once again handled very poorly, for all the same reasons as before, from it being shanghaied into the story for nothing more than shock value, to it being very disrespectful to actual suicide victims. It's all there. It's made even worse by the fact that at least with Sayori, there was actually an attempt to make her actions feel not coerced into the story, even if the end result was still abysmally executed. Here it's like Salvado said, fuck it, let's move on to the next part please! God fucking damn it, I hate this game so much. And even with all that being said, there's still one thing present in this act that makes both suicide scenes even worse than before: the aftermath of Yuri's death. After Yuri stabs herself, Natsuki enters the room, vomits, and then runs away. Monika then enters the scene and straight up deletes both Yuri and Natsuki's character files. What the fuck? That's not how you write a story! That's not how you write anything for that matter! Why the actual fuck does Monika force Yuri to end her life, yet all of a fucking sudden Natsuki gets off scot-free and disappears with some code Monika decided to type up? She does the same thing to Yuri too, so why couldn't she have just deleted them both after killing Sayori? Where are the explanations? Where are the conflicts? Who the actual fuck wrote this section, and why is it so unbelievably atrocious? And please, don't give me the excuse that Yuri dies and not Natsuki because Monika amplified their unlikable traits, which are Yuri's obsessiveness and Natsuki's insecurity. Insecurity can also lead to suicide, something that does actually lead to Natsuki killing herself rarely. And I say rarely because there is an Easter egg in the game in which there's a small chance that Natsuki will snap her neck in the middle of Act 2 and die. However, for some reason, this has zero bearing on the plot, and the game resumes as normal afterwards. The amount of contrivances in this game is going off the charts, Jesus Christ. The entirety of Act 2 and the way Sayori's death is handled in Act 1 is also why you cannot say that the characters are well written due to their stereotypical nature and how the game introduces their very real struggles. This doesn't work because their issues are, as stated before, very forced. Yuri and Natsuki never reveal anything about themselves in Act 1, and Sayori is only presented as depressed on the inside conveniently the day before she dies, making it, as I said before, very obvious that it is all Monika's doing. Furthermore, this sequence at the end makes Act 2 as relevant to the main story as Shrek the Third when compared to the rest of the Shrek quadrilogy. Monika did not have to go through the trouble of this boring slog of a second act when she could have just deleted Yuri and Natsuki's character files before. It makes no fucking sense whatsoever, and it makes me want to drink a gallon of mace. Worst part is that wasn't even the end of the game or where my tirade stop. This act is in its own section because there's too much to unpack in it that's not just limited to the act itself. So we last left off with Monika deleting Natsuki and Yuri's character files. After she does this, she force restarts the game and we're obliged to engage in numerous discussions with her about a myriad of topics. However, eventually the player gets tired of this and deletes Monika's CHR file the same way she deleted the rest of the girls from existence. Okay. Where do I even begin? I don't know. How about we get into how the twist is completely debunked before you even boot up the game? Yeah, the official Steam page completely dispels any attempt at this plot twist being surprising because the game is literally tagged as a quote-unquote psychological horror game along with containing numerous other tags such as gore and violence. And that's not all. As soon as you boot up the game, you are prompted to a screen where you must sign an agreement that states that you are at least 13 years old and that you understand that this game contains many elements of horror in it. And then to cap it all off, every single time you boot up the game, a screen that states that the game is quote-unquote not for those who are easily disturbed will pop up before you are allowed to do literally anything else. Yeah, considering the fact that this game basically relies on its plot twist to be even remotely interesting speaks volumes on how utterly pointless it all is in the end. And to those of you saying, well duh, Salvado had to put that in the game because if not it would land in court, I hear you. I understand that this all needed to be present in order for the game to be profited off of, let alone for it to be able to be played on platforms like Steam. However, that still doesn't change the fact that it fundamentally obliterates the twist and any of its impact. As soon as you even go to download the game, you already know something is up, and that just demolishes anything the twist had going for it, which is once again, what the game relies on to be interesting after the unnecessary slog of content that we were forced to sit through beforehand. On a different, yet somewhat similar note, the fourth wall break here just doesn't work because the game has already revealed itself to be not all that it seems with the Sayori death, and then again with the Yuri death. Once you make it to this point in the game, it feels worthless because you knew it was coming as soon as Sayori bid adieu to her life at the end of Act 1. It just feels like the plot twist is here to be here, and it makes Act 2 feel even less necessary than before. Now that we know that the game has already shoved the fact that there is a twist in it down our throats before the main twist that was clearly intended to be the one that really matters in the grand scheme of things, let's move on to Monika's actions and how unbelievably stupid they all are. First of all, why did Monika tamper with Sayori's CHR file by making her kill herself? The game never suggests the fact that Monika's obsessed with suicide or whatever, so why did she force Sayori to kill herself instead of literally anything else? It doesn't help her case at all considering the fact that she reveals her motivation at the end of the game. Did she just not think things through? That doesn't make any sense either, because she knows how to delete and manipulate game files remotely, meaning that she sure as hell isn't stupid, so the only plausible explanation I can piece together is that Salvador needed some way to make her unlikable and malevolent, and so he just forced the incident into the story so that we are revolted by Monika's endeavors. The same thing goes for the Yuri suicide scene. Did Monika have some kind of underlying animosity for Yuri that made her crank her self-harm tendencies to the max? The answer is no, because as always, there is no explanation. And then for some odd reason Natsuki is free to go? Why did Monika seemingly have it out for Yuri yet she somehow mysteriously saves Natsuki from that fate? Why did she only change her AI and not Natsuki's? It's so fucking stupid, man, I swear to God. And yet again, the same goes for practically the entire game. Why did Monika not do all this to begin with? As I said before, the game doesn't suggest the fact that her coding abilities are limited to certain intervals of time, so if she just wanted to be with us, why couldn't she have just been the only character and fucking talk to us? Everything that has happened since the game started was completely unnecessary from both our perspective, since it gave us useless exposition that 1, did not flesh out the characters at all, and 2, flat out didn't matter considering the fact that this twist exists, and from Monika's perspective as well, because this all could have been avoided if she used her brain and if Salvador didn't feel the need to villainize her. And to the people typing up their comments right now stating, well, she states she's bad at coding and claims that her plan backfired, duh. Let's go ahead and break down why her being bad at coding is wrong. In fact, let's actually make a full-fledged chart for this, shall we? Starting off with the evidence that shows that Monika is bad at coding is, of course, her plans to increase the other girls' unlikable traits. And by the way, this doesn't disprove what I said before about her making the girls kill themselves, because it should have been obvious that amplifying obsessiveness, and especially depression, in someone will lead them to ending their own lives. This evidence could be used as valid. Next, we have something I've already disproved but that I will debunk once again, which is the glitching in Act 2. While on a superficial level, this could be used as evidence that supports the claim that she's bad at coding due to the game seemingly falling apart, this doesn't work since the game deliberately zooms into Monika's face at times, and also various events happen that don't at all seem to be the game glitching but rather Monika trying to scare the player, such as the screen turning blood red or static appearing when the characters are arguing. Trying to say that is a glitch is like trying to defend Sonic.exe, a story in which very obvious altered imagery is passed off as quote-unquote just a glitch. Yeah, totally a glitch. Moving along to the evidence that supports that she's good at coding, we have the fact that she modified Sayori's code with ease and the game didn't glitch at all back then. It only glitched a bit when we walked into the scene of Sayori hanging herself, and then the screen faded to black afterwards, implying that there was barely any damage done to the game. Another piece of evidence to support this claim is that she literally rebuilds the entire setting and manages to annul any use of certain features such as the skip feature during Act 3. This would require lots of coding knowledge more than just modifying the character's files. And the smoking gun to all this? The fact that after Act 3, she completely reinstates the entire game without her after she had mangled it beyond imagination. So the conclusion to this? She was stupid and didn't think her actions through when it came to amplifying the girls' unlikable traits. As I said before, she should have known that this was going to happen to them. She's just being humble when she states that she's bad at coding. Moreover, Monika essentially did the exact opposite of what she wanted to do by killing off and deleting the rest of the literature club. She literally made herself look like an unlikable, selfish prick, which is counterproductive considering the fact that her goal was literally to spend the rest of eternity with us. If she wanted us to maybe not delete her character file or even have an iota of respect or love for her, she shouldn't have done all this unnecessary stupid shit beforehand. This is once again Salvador not knowing what character motivations are and just making the antagonist do whatever so that she's despicable in one way or another. Also, why did Monika conveniently forget to somehow protect her character file? If she's able to rebuild the game, corrupt and manipulate the other characters' AIs, and also flat out delete those characters' CHR files, why on God's green earth is she unable to protect her own character file? I know, considering everything I've said previously, Monika is a flat out opaque and irrational creature, but that sounds like a blunder not even the stupidest people I know would make. It's just once again, another excuse that was synthetically and hastily manufactured into the story just so the game could end. Unfortunately, it's not just Monika or the rest of the characters that suffer through this utter garbage of a story as well. It's also the pacing. By this point, the pacing is thrown out the window and is less coherent than the pacing in a bad Family Guy episode. Sorry, that was redundant. The pacing is thrown out the window and is less coherent than the pacing in a Family Guy episode. As stated previously, when looking at the gameplay footage recorded for this video, Act 1 caps in at around 3 hours long. Act 2, minus what is actually important to the plot, caps in at around an hour and a half long. And then for some odd reason, what is actually important to the plot in Act 2 only gets 4 minutes to shine? Who wrote this? Pacing like this in a game that is a literal meta-take on a visual novel has to be good, and spending 4 hours on useless exposition is not how you properly pace something like that. This once again proves that Dan Salvato has quite literally no experience in writing visual novels and just crammed a ton of useless content into a game that contains a notion that goes against that just to pad out the runtime. And remember, I played the game at a normal pace, reading the dialogue boxes and not attempting to blaze through. That means that if you want to do the same, you're looking at around 5 hours of a filler-coded story with absolutely nothing going for it. Oh, and don't get me fucking started on the pacing at the end of the game too. The end conversation with Monika literally lasts another whopping hour and a half, and nothing interesting happens in it. Perhaps there could be a change of gameplay or something like that, but who the fuck am I kidding? That never had a possibility of happening considering the awful pacing that preceded the twist. And yes, I am aware of the fact that you must delete Monika's character file in order to achieve the ending, and that technically that could count as a change of gameplay or anything interesting. However, the issue with that is that doing this is effortless and takes less than a minute to do so. So, that means that you've wasted 6 hours of your life on useless details that did nothing but amount to you deleting a character file, which honestly sucks, because this is genuinely one of the only creative things the game did throughout its runtime, and it could have and should have been more fleshed out and used much more in the game considering how monotonous the rest of it is. To end off this section, I want to talk about how there's nothing being said about visual novels, dating simulators, or anything else in this game with its plot twist. It's not a commentary about abuse or suicide, since those topics are handled very poorly as stated before either, so it feels like the game is just breaking the fourth wall for the sake of breaking it. It's all executed in the worst way possible and really makes you question why the game is so popular to begin with. Is it because it's unique? If that's the case, then that sets a dangerous precedent going forward. This plot twist specifically just feels like it exists to be deconstructed by theorizers and video essay YouTubers, as it has no meaning whatsoever taking Sayori's death into consideration. Alright. Let's move on to the ending. After we delete Monika's character file, she begins to project to us about how we tortured her and whatnot, before completely shifting her demeanor to being apologetic and sympathy begging. If there's one section of this game that actually did what it was supposed to do and made me actually feel something that wasn't boredom, it was this part, due to the minor amount of rage I felt when Monika began trying to sympathize with the MC, and the amount of joy I was filled with when I realized that my least favorite character of all time got what they deserved, and that the game was almost over. The only issue with this sequence is that it is once again inconsistent with what happened beforehand with the rest of the girls. They weren't being drowned out and saying their last words. They either committed suicide or poofed out of existence without a chance of saying their final words. Why is Monika any different? There is absolutely nothing that suggests that she's any different when it comes to this situation specifically. Moving on, after Monika finishes her rambling, the game restarts, and to nobody's surprise, she's missing! Hey, wait a second, why on God's green earth are the other girls back? Monika literally deleted all of them, why are they fine like nothing happened all of a sudden? This shit makes no fucking sense! Anyway, the game progresses through the same slog that was the first act, but fortunately only for a couple minutes, until yet another plot twist happens, in which Sayori goes insane and takes on Monika's personality? Okay, Why did this happen? Monika's character file has been flat out deleted, meaning that she should be unable to control anybody or anything in this world anymore, correct? So that eliminates the possibility of it being Monika remotely controlling Sayori here, meaning that I can't find any plausible explanation for why she's so self-aware all of a sudden. In the first original act, she is completely fine and acts exactly how the game programs her to be. So why does she somehow break the fourth wall and rebel against that here? What the fuck is this game's problem with inconsistency, god fucking damn it? And please don't give me the excuse that it's because there's something about being the club president that magically gives anyone who has that title self-awareness. The game never says why or how that is the case, and Monika has been self-aware for as long as she's been trapped here, so don't give me that pretext. After this, somehow Monika manages to re-emerge from the shadows and destroy everything when we literally fucking deleted her. I'm not even gonna try and get angry here, let's just finish going over the game already. Directly preceding Monika stopping Sayori from quote-unquote hurting the player is a credits sequence that is admittedly kinda cool. The game then ends with a poem Monika gives us before it forcefully closes. Wow. Just fucking wow. That was quite possibly the worst thing I have ever had to sit. Hold on, wait a minute. We aren't done yet, because if you've messed around with the game's files, you know that there's another ending you can unlock by doing so before you even start the game. If you decide to delete Monika's character file before even booting up the game, when you start a new file, Sayori will seemingly become self-aware, go insane, and the game will then close. If you choose to reopen it, Sayori is seen hanging herself. Once again, I don't need to explain how unbelievably ludicrous this ending is, as I already did before with the previous ending. If you want to hear the Sparks Notes version, it is inconsistent with what is established in the normal game, and is disrespectful as shit to actual suicide victims. And not only that, if you choose to delete the other girls, besides Sayori, or delete Monika at any other point in the game, absolutely nothing different happens. Way to go, Salvado! You have left yet another cool concept lingering around and collecting dust instead of actually fleshing it out. And yes, I am aware that there's a couple other endings, such as the so-called quote-unquote happy one, but I don't feel like going over them, because not only are they inconsequential, but they are also horribly written for the same reasons stated before. Okay, back to what I was saying earlier. Wow. Just fucking wow. That was quite possibly the worst thing I have ever had to sit through and analyze. The amount of boredom, frustration, and downright animosity I have towards this game is absolutely unmatched with anything I've ever experienced. I love Amy, I am so fucking sorry, you are nothing compared to this abomination. And you want to know the worst part? The absolute bottom of the goddamn barrel? We are not even close to being finished with this game. Okay. This section is more of a tangent about the ddlc community and a quick message to them about the way they perceive the game. Remember though, as long as you're not being a gooner about it, you're entitled to your own opinion. Dear Doki Doki Literature Club fans, all of you have completely missed the point of this quote-unquote video game and have easily made it one of the most overrated pieces of media of all time. The way you all praise the characters is genuinely concerning, as they are all trite, generic pieces of paper and are not supposed to be engaging or likable in the slightest, yet you all treat them like flawless goddesses for whatever reason. Adding on to that, the gooning and downright obsessiveness I have seen regarding Monika specifically is incredibly concerning. Why do you people like this disgusting excuse of a fictional character? Is it because she's a quote-unquote misunderstood, bland character that you can all relate to and God knows why? Well, too bad, because she is an unlikable asshole and deserves to choke on dog shit. Now, going back to what I was saying before about missing the point of the game, by glorifying these tasteless, bland piles of garbage, you are quite literally deterring people from the experience that the game is supposed to be. The Anime Literature Club part of the game is supposed to be a goddamn facade and was not intended to be taken seriously at all. I am genuinely convinced that most quote-unquote fans of this game have never actually played it before and just accidentally stumbled upon the characters one day on Rule 34 and started fapping their dinglings to them. I understand that the story, both in the visual novel and psychological horror parts of the game, is incredibly poorly written. But please, have the goddamn brain cells and the slightest bit of dignity to realize that what you are doing is actively damaging the property that you hold so near and dear to your heart. That's all I got. Please, for the love of God, ddlc fandom, or at least most of you, look at yourselves in the mirror and realize that what you are doing is extremely counterproductive and flat out incorrect when taking the original game into accountability. Thank you. Okay, We are now finished with the original 2017 release of the game, and my god, we all know how bad that turned out to be. But on the other hand, we have the Plus DLC, and after comparing it to the original, while I still hate it basically just as much, it does fix some issues with the original game, albeit not the amount necessary to make the game even remotely decent. So let's begin with the gameplay. Obviously, nothing has changed, but of course, as I said before, that's a given considering the fact that it is a visual novel, and that genre of gaming isn't supposed to have any gameplay. What about the choices you make in the story though? Doesn't that change? Surely considering the fact that Salvato had nearly 4 years to improve the game means that it couldn't be more evident that he would take the time to actually give the story more versatility when it comes to making choices, correct? Well, sorry to burst you guys' non-existent bubbles, but that's not the case. The gameplay is quite literally the exact same as the original. Nothing, including the choices, changes. Sayori's suicide is unavoidable, walking home with a certain girl doesn't do anything, it's all still there. Now let's move on to the characters, and I must say, while the game did give them a bit more exposition and gave us a bit more of a reason to care about them, it still does not fix the issue of them being blank sheets of paper in the original story. What I mean by this is that the side stories, while they give us a lot more information about the characters and flesh them out much more than the original game, are completely worthless when you take the main story into consideration. The side stories are extra unlockables that you can play through once you finish the original story, meaning that in the context of the main events of the game, they are useless. We are not given the exposition before Monika forces the rest of the literature club to kill themselves or before she flat out deletes them, meaning that we have no reason to care for the characters before she does these horrible things to them. And no, I am not going into each of the side stories and dissecting them as I did with the original story before. The writing is as creatively bankrupt as it was in Act 1, and while it does give the characters a bit more personality, that only extends to how the medium of visual novels typically does that, meaning in a pretty boring and monotonous way. Furthermore, the side stories also present plenty of contradictions, plot holes, and cliches that I've already stated and elaborated upon before. So no, I am not going over them in excruciating detail. If this video gets enough attention and you guys beg your hearts out, then maybe in the future I'll make a video meticulously deconstructing every single one of them and every last detail they contain, but because I don't want to make this video too long and for the sake of not boring you guys out of your minds, I'm not going over them. Moving on. Now we have reached where most of my complaints with the original game came from, the story. Typically when people take a long time to make things like this, it's because they've been painstakingly trying to improve the original source material because, well, it's what you're supposed to do when it comes to anything. You are supposed to surmount what you have made previously, not retrogress or keep it the same way. Since Doki Doki Plus was released 4 years after the original game, then that means that the story must have improved in some way since that is where most of its flaws lie previously. Right? Who the fuck are you kidding? Of course not! That would take effort, and a genuine knowledge and passion of visual novels in order to make the story better in any way, shape, or form. And clearly, Salvato didn't do that and somehow spent 4 years on this game, never thinking to himself, maybe this section was too long. Or, maybe there's this massive plot hole I should fix. But no, nothing changed, and all we got from the rest of the DLC was better presentation, which is worthless considering the fact that this is supposed to be a psychological horror game, console ports, and side stories that serve no purpose in the long run. Everything else in this release, including the incredibly poorly written story, is still present and was not even revised, edited, or even looked at in order to improve it somehow. Except, not really. Along with all the useless content mentioned before, the Plus DLC brought us a new, underlying story that seems somewhat interesting, so as I did before with Act 3, let's go ahead and dissect it. The game begins by prompting us to a brand new interface made by a company known as Metaverse Enterprise Solutions. Their goal is to create a simulation to test whether or not they are living in a simulation, leading to the creation of Doki Doki Literature Club. They also communicate between each other via email when Monika becomes self-aware and destroys her universe, which is cool, I guess. Alright, let's begin with the least imperative issues and work our way down to the issues that fundamentally shatter the story to bits. First and foremost, I'd just like to show you guys this short clip from one of Dan Salvato's developer streams from back in 2018, roughly 3 years before the Plus DLC released.
Oh, another thing that I really tried to do with this dialogue, which I don't really mention all that much, but I deliberately wrote the sentence structure and the phrases to make it feel like it was like a poorly translated Japanese visual novel. Like, there's just certain phrases that are like you hear in like Japanese, but you don't really hear in English. Like when someone is like, that's like dash, like cut or ellipses, like sorewa, and they like trail off. You don't really hear that in like English, but I like tried to put those things in here to like make it feel just that much more cheesy, if that makes sense.
Yikes. This intention no longer makes any sense when taking the MES lore into account. If ddlc is now supposed to be a simulation to test if the world that the company is living in is also a simulation, why would they need to poorly translate the game from Japanese and then to English? That's like if I wrote this video script in Spanish and then translated it very shoddily to English. It does nothing but actively hinder the team's goal and wastes their time for no other reason than to possibly improve the aesthetic of the visual novel, which is once again impertinent to their main goal. Going a layer deeper, the emails between the team members feel incredibly forced. They are a preposterous pretext for Dan to explain the story without the audience trying to figure out what's happening on their own, which makes me think that to an extent, Salvato thinks we're stupid. And that is truly a travesty that is borderline insulting. The emails also leave several untied loose ends that feel like details that were just brought up just to be brought up. Things such as the alternate universes are briefly mentioned and never expanded upon, making it all seem extremely coerced. And no, the side stories don't count, and I'll explain why later. Furthermore, Monika gaining sentience and doing all this shit is also extremely stupid. If the MES company is able to create AIs like her and entire simulations that are basically parallel universes constructed by them, why is there no protocol or failsafe to stop something like this from happening? It just seems like the MES is making the same mistakes Monika did in the original game, as this is the exact same blunder she committed when she forgot to protect her own character file against the player. All this also makes you question the authenticity and meaning of the side stories too. After looking into them, they seem like worthless AUs that don't make any sense when taking the MES lore into accountability. The point of these simulations is to test whether or not the MES team's world is a simulation, so why dick around and create these useless side stories? It's almost like Salvato wanted to, but forgot that he wanted to flesh out the characters more at the very end, making him even more pathetic as a game developer. Moving forward, the end of Act 3 where you delete Monika's file now feels a lot less interactive and creative, which is saying a lot considering the fact that the original game was already uninteresting enough and that this concept wasn't expanded upon in the slightest. Making it so that you delete her in the simulation removes the urgency and creepiness the original game had at the very end. I can't believe we were able to go from 0 into the negatives when it comes to how unbelievably monotonous this game is, but here we are. Now we're getting into the territory that honestly offends me. To recap real quick, I previously stated in Acts 1 and 2 about how this game treats suicide and domestic violence very poorly, in the form of both Yuri and Sayori's deaths, as well as in the form of Natsuki's father violating her. I want you all to just pause real quick and think about how the MES lore makes the handling of these subjects even worse than I could have ever imagined. Done thinking? Well, here's how. By adding this lore to the mix of what was already a disrespectful and shameless attempt at trying to represent these subject matters, it only amplifies how offensive their inclusion is. It makes it all seem meaningless and even more disgusting, which speaks volumes on how desperate Salvato was to create a hook for the audience to latch onto. The same goes for the rest of the original game. All of it seems even more worthless and padded out just for the sake of making the game long. The secret poems seem even less authentic, the delicate topics feel even more forced, and all of it is just a bonanza of bullshit added to the game just so that the game's runtime meets the quota for how long a visual novel should be. Additionally, the fourth wall breaks are also mangled even more than before when it comes to their plot significance. There were already 3 other spoilers the game gives you before you even start playing it that something's up, and now with this entire operating system and new lore, it makes it all the more worthless. And to top it all off, the MES lore does nothing but subtract the charm that the original game tried to have, which was just to be a visual novel where a character goes rogue after realizing that there's another person besides them in the game. Similar to how Monika makes Sayori and Yuri kill themselves in the original game, a wonderful example of contrived storytelling, it feels like the lore was simply created just to promote Project Lipatina, something that was already done before with the in-game files on the original game's release. So yeah, fuck it. There's probably a lot more to cover, but I don't really see the point. The MES lore does nothing but overcomplicate a game that was already extremely poorly written and downright disgusting in certain areas. This all reminds me of what FNAF Help Wanted did to the FNAF franchise, and made it much more meta and unnecessarily complicated just for the sake of doing so. And in the case of ddlc, it's made even worse in that regard, for 2 reasons. One is the fact that unlike FNAF, ddlc's story, as discussed in this video, was dogshit. It was chock full of plot holes, filler, cliches, etc., and in all honesty, needed to be completely rewritten for it to even be considered a passable story. 2 is that ddlc was already meta before. It did what it wanted to do. It was a visual novel that subverted its own genre by being self-aware, and even if once again, it was extremely poorly written, adding another layer on top of that did absolutely nothing but make the game's story even more frustrating than before. I'm convinced that Salvato did absolutely nothing but dick around in the studio for a couple years and at the last minute concocted the most opaque story I've ever had the displeasure of diving into, without thinking twice about any of the issues or gargantuan flaws the story had in its writing before. Salvato, why the fuck would you do this? Why would you spend 4 valuable years of your life creating an expansion pack for your game, and then proceed not to fix any of the major issues present, essentially making it look like your game is perfect when it is far from that? You are setting a terrible example for not only your deranged and unhinged fanbase, but also an even worse example for new and upcoming video game developers. This DLC is a terrible extension of an already atrocious excuse for a video game, and is a disgrace to much better indie horror games that are cheaper and sometimes even free, along with indie gaming in general. Fuck you, Salvato. I hope you're happy with what you've done. Generally speaking, I think that it is safe to say that ddlc is one of, if not, the very worst indie horror game out there, and genuinely one of the worst experiences I have ever had playing a video game. People, myself included, can point and make fun of games like Poppy Playtime, Rainbow Friends, and Garden of Banban. But you know what? At least they were fun to some extent, whether it be ironic or unironic, and weren't disrespectful to anyone or anything. But this? No, no, no. I refuse to believe that besides the presentation and the soundtrack, 2 things that don't matter considering what the game is trying to do, there are no redeeming qualities to this game, and it is god-awful in every sense of the word. The pacing is atrocious, and certain acts and traits of characters are thrown into the story and glued together for nothing more than to shock the audience. The characters are extremely poorly written, with most of them being one-dimensional, tasteless motherfuckers with nothing going for them, with the only exception being one of the worst fictional characters in all of media. The story is a boring mess filled to the brim with tropes and filler-coded content that does absolutely nothing to explore the narrative of the meta take it's trying to display, or flesh out its characters in any way possible. The gameplay, while not really applicable to the game since it's a visual novel, contains choices that have zero bearing on the plot whatsoever, and that could have and should have uncovered much more about the characters, instead of just existing to pad out the runtime. And at the top of the rancid-smelling shit pile, the Plus DLC does absolutely nothing to fix the issues present in the original release, and makes me think that Dan Salvato did absolutely nothing but dick around for 4 years, while adding even more unnecessary layers to the game's lore that introduce nothing but contrivances and plot holes that further complicate the game for no other reason than because it can. The fact that the game got this much popularity and an actual fan base somehow is an insult to indie horror and parodies in general, and it being quote-unquote unique does not help its case in the slightest. There are almost no redeeming qualities in this game, and any enjoyment you could possibly joke out of it would taste so much sweeter in literally any other video game, including Crazy Bus. You can like this game all you want, but that will not change the objectively awful and fundamentally broken aspects of this barbaric excuse of a video game. Doki Doki Literature Club fucking sucks objectively, and that sums the game up in the simplest way possible. Hey guys, thank you all for watching this video. I think that I might have gone over the deep end sometimes when both writing the script for it and recording it, but hey, it was all worth it in the end for both content and annihilating the shit out of my second least favorite game of all time. I'm going to leave 3 videos in the description that also discuss how awful the game is, in case you guys want more content on the subject. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, as I appreciate every single one of you as my audience members, and I hope you all have a fantastic day. Adieu!